All right, so chapter 8 of the Behavior Change Specialist Manual, we're looking at social influences on behavior change. So we are going to sort of look at how social influences do tend to affect us. I mean, this is honestly a pretty big one for the fitness industry, just in terms of like how much it actually kind of affects us. There is a lot of misinformation out there, from people who are self-proclaimed fitness or health experts or gurus or whatever they want to call themselves. But social influence is going to be any type of like influence on like an individual from outside sources such as media, advertising, friends, family, co-workers, people that they hire, like their personal trainer and stuff. Like all of those can be social influences. So there are elements, like social elements, that have either positive or negative impacts on like our attitudes or on like our behaviors, right? So your friends, your family, the media, all of that. And then us as wellness professionals, right? Remember, we talked a little bit about modeling the other day, and how like it's important for the trainer to lead a healthy lifestyle in order to encourage the client to do that. If they see what an overall positive healthy lifestyle is and how it can impact life positively, they're much more likely to adhere to that. And so there's a lot of sources out there. You can also consider these to be like interpersonal influences, right? That's a really big one. But it sort of shapes the world that we live in and creates like these different, like what we call social norms, and like the world is always changing. There's definitely like, influences here and there that are constantly sort of like changing our opinions and influencing things, like even just like without getting like too political about things, but like the we talk about like the mask mandates and stuff, like when that first sort of went into place, I was like, very like super pro mask, where I was like, yeah, of course, like it's just not that much effort, it obviously it's sort of a harm care principle thing, where it's like, yeah, we wear this thing, everybody's a little bit safer, and we don't have to worry about people. Great. We're encouraging people to wash their hands. Like, yeah, it's a little annoying. None of us can hear, very well. It's a little bit annoying, and, it's here and there, and it might cause some issues, but like for the most part, I'm like, those benefits outweigh the costs, in my opinion, I didn't really have any like scientific evidence to really back that up. I just, it made sense to me that like to do something that was very minor effort, it'd have positive benefits. And so like my social norm, like I was around like a social influence group that was sort of like, exposed to that opinion, and that sort of shaped like how our actions were. And it kind of became like a consistent thing. There was never really any arguing about that in like my friend group and stuff. And then like it was kind of interesting, like, we go on and on and on, and like eventually like there's a vaccine, which I'm also a very big fan of. And that comes out and sort of makes it a lot easier for like people to be sort of inoculated to this thing. And now it's like the care harm thing. To me, it was like the amount of care that you were giving versus the amount of harm that a mask would do. There was a big discrepancy there. And now that like there's a vaccine out, it's like that discrepancy is sort of like that gap has closed. And I was reading a really interesting article that was all about how it is making education very challenging for like young kids who are like developing, because they can't hear their teacher very well. They're not, they're too afraid to ask questions, like it's just negatively impacting like these very formative years for little kids. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like I never really thought about that, to have these like things on, it just makes it really hard for kids to go to school. And so it's like, well, now like our future is not getting like an education. And some, parents can afford to hire like a tutor. And so they can close that gap, like that discrepancy from wearing this equipment can kind of disappear, but not every family can afford like special tutoring. So it kind of makes like the inequality, the education inequality gap even larger. And I think that is really detrimental. to the world personally, you know? And so like when I heard that, my social influences started to switch a little bit. And now we're sort of on the other side of this thing, you know, for the most part. Obviously, that is subject to change. But you know, we're sort of on the other side of this thing, and it's like, yeah, like for me, if I was like, you know, the parent of like a kid in school, I'd probably say like, hey, like, you know, kids vaxxed up, I'd much rather have them like, you know, mask up so they can learn and have like a better future. These are all just opinions that I have, and I have these opinions because like this is the circle of influence that I've been exposed to, right? So one big thing that's really nice about like understanding social cognitive theory is like it really gives me a little bit of perspective to say things like this without worrying about like stepping on anybody's toes. I'm not worried about like, you know, triggering anybody else with like their opinions, because like these opinions are mine, and I'm definitely not worried about, you know, what someone else might think about it, because I am willing to like change those, you know. I'm willing to understand that like my opinions have been shaped by the things that I'm socially around. So if you've been listening to any of this and you're like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, right? That's great, because it's like part of the social influence, right? If you've got like a slightly different influence, or, you know, different knowledge or things that you've been exposed to, you know, we can sort of like share those things and like have some congruency there. And it's a really, really kind of fun thing to look at. You know, I go back home, everybody like from where I'm from, very different opinions to where, you know, what I have now. And it's because like, you know, that's a different part of the country. It's like growing up a different way. Like there's just different things you're kind of exposed to. And we don't really think about that, but that's where we start to understand like our social norms or our biases. Sometimes there's social biases that we have. And like, you know, when you're biased towards something, you just tend to, you know, say that, well, that's the natural default setting, you know, like that's how things work. And it's just sort of your natural approach. And if we understand that like our natural approach, our default setting has really kind of been shaped by what it is we've been exposed to, like these social norms and influences like that, it can be a really powerful tool for us to be more productive, happy, healthy people, you know. um, I was just talking about this yesterday, like how sometimes I was just talking to my girlfriend about this yesterday, about how like sometimes somebody will have like an opinion, and then that opinion will, you know, like information will come out and it'll sort of like counter out that opinion, and people will just like dig their heels in and be like, nope, this is how it is, nope, 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 you know. Like, and they just refuse to kind of like, you know, listen. And I find that very interesting because like, you know, people are I was kind of summarizing as like, I was like, people are often so afraid to be wrong, you know. And it's like sometimes I feel like I'm like, I love being wrong, because like, you know, if I'm wrong, then I get to like learn something new and I get to be right later. You know, like, but that was like kind of a fun, you know, sort of approach. And so this is one of the reasons why I really like talking about social influences. It's not a ton of information. It's one of our shortest chapters that we've got, actually. But I love talking about it because it's really fun to sort of analyze where your opinions and your habits and your norms sort of come from, you know? Again, like I've talked about, like how I've had clients who are just like, well, you know, my parents are obese and I'm obese, and like I've just always kind of struggled with my weight and this and that. And it's like, you know, they're like, I just think, you know, it's genetic. And don't get me wrong, there's a huge, obviously huge genetic component to obesity. But I've asked them sometimes, I'm like, well, let's say that like, you know, you're stuck with some genetics, right? And that gives you like a certain predisposition. Would you say that it's fair that your habits also sort of shape like your lifestyle, and you're going to, you know, you're going to absorb your habits from the people that you are like, you know, exposed to, and the people you're exposed most to are like your families, and they were exposed to their habits, right? And sort of like shaped those things. So yes, there's going to be a genetic component, but it could also just be like, you know, your attitude or like behavior or whatever around like diet and exercise. And you know, that's kind of a fun conversation because like, oh yeah, like that makes a lot more sense. And what's great about that what's great about all this is that this is the kind of stuff that we have the most personal control over. I can't change my genetics, right? But I can look at how my parents have done things and how I do things and how that is the same, but also maybe destructive. And then go, you know what? I am going to change that and do it a slightly different way than I do my parents. Let's back home. Like my parents refuse to use their dishwasher. Like they have one, but they're just like, I like washing them manually. I'm like, why? Like it's cleaner, it uses less water, and it is much less work. And they have a great dishwasher. And so that is definitely not an opinion that I have. And I'm trying to socially influence them to make their lives a little easier. But yeah, that is sort of our social influence. So this is where we're sort of talking about cultural norms and things like that. All right. By the way, if you guys have any fun comments or questions or anything, this is a great day to chime in, because this is a very sort of we're talking about where our thoughts and our opinions and stuff like that come from, which is a really good time to get some great sort of conversation. And so a social norm, like I said, is going to be a culturally accepted behavior. It is sort of culturally acceptable to look a certain way, to act a certain way, to dress a certain way, to drive a certain type of car, to have a certain type of job. These are all sort of social norms that have sort of been created over a really long time. And so a lot of times when we are looking for belonging, we are sort of attaching onto these social norms. So you guys know I love to do it. I got one more crash course video to show you today, all about social cognitive theory. It's not that one, it is that one.
Friends.
But, well.
Would walk up to me and
oh, the mud water. Man, this thing has been around for a while now. All right, here we go.
Question. Why do people do horrible things? Slave owners and Nazis, any of the perpetrators of history's atrocities, how do they so successfully dehumanize other people for so long? At a smaller scale, how do bullies in the lunchroom manage to treat other kids with such cruelty and then go home and pet their dog and call their grandma and say happy birthday? Most of what we've been studying so far has focused on the individual. We've covered subfields of psychology like cognitive, personality, and clinical psychology, which tend to address the phenomena contained within a single person's mind. But there's also social psychology, which focuses on the power of the situation. It examines how we think about, influence, and relate to one another in certain conditions, and it's better equipped to answer this question about people doing horrible things. Social psychology can not only give us some of the tools we need to understand why people behave brutally, it can also help us understand why we sometimes act heroically. Like, why did Jean Valjean reveal his true identity to save some stranger from being tried in his place? And why did Nazi Oskar Schindler risk his own hide to save over 1,000 Jewish people? What made Darth Vader throw the Emperor down that hole, even as he was being electrocuted? I can't say there are any easy answers about either humanity's greatness or its horribleness. Certainly there aren't any that we can find in the next 10 minutes. But we can point ourselves in the right direction, and it starts with social thinking. When we're trying to understand why people act like villains or heroes, one of the things we're really asking is, did they do what they did because of their personality or their situation? Austrian psychologist Fritz Heider began plumbing the depths of this question in the 1920s when he was developing what's now known as the Attribution Theory. This theory simply suggests that we can explain someone's behavior by crediting either their stable, enduring traits, also known as their disposition, or the situation at hand. And we tend to attribute people's behavior to either one or the other. Sounds pretty simple, but it can be surprisingly hard to tell whether someone's behavior is dispositional or situational. Say you see Bruno at a party, and he's acting like a wallflower all night. You might assume that he just has a shy personality, but maybe he doesn't. Maybe he'd ordinarily be reenacting all the moves from Footloose at this party, but on this night, he had a twisted ankle, or a headache, or he'd just seen his ex with somebody new. Those are all situational explanations. Overestimating the forces of personality while underestimating the power of the situation is called the fundamental attribution error. And as you can imagine, making this kind of error can really end up warping your opinion of another person and lead to false snap judgments. This might not be such a big deal when it comes to Bruno and his awesome dance moves, but according to one study of college students, 7 in 10 women report that men have misread their polite friendliness, which would be appropriate for the situation, as a sexual come-on. We choose how we explain other people's behavior every day, and what we choose to believe can have big consequences. For example, our political views will likely be strongly influenced by whether we decide to attribute poverty or homelessness to personal dispositions, like being lazy and looking for a handout, or social circumstances, like lack of education and opportunity. And these attitudes can in turn affect our actions. Activists and politicians know this well, and they can use it to their advantage to persuade people in different ways. In the late 1970s and 80s, psychologists Richard Petty and John Cacioppo developed a dual process theory of understanding how persuasion works. The first part of their model is known as the central route persuasion, and it involves calling on basic thinking and reasoning to convince people. This is what's at work when interested people focus on the evidence and arguments at hand and are persuaded by the actual content of the message. So when you're watching a political debate, you might be persuaded by a candidate's particular policies, positions, or voting history. That is, the stuff they're actually saying. But we all know that persuasion involves more than that. There's also peripheral route persuasion at work. This influences people by way of incidental cues, like a speaker's physical attractiveness or personal relatability. There's not a lot of hard thinking going on here. It's more of a gut reaction. So you might decide to vote for a particular candidate because you think they're cute or because they're from your hometown. Peripheral route persuasion happens more readily when you're not paying a ton of attention, which is why billboards and television ads can be scarily effective. So that's how politicians and advertisers and maybe bosses and teachers and pushy friends try to change our behavior by changing our attitudes. But it turns out that the reverse is true too. Our attitudes can be affected by our behaviors. You might have heard of the phrase fake it till you make it, meaning if you smile when you're actually sad, the act of smiling may carry you through an attitude change until you actually feel better. Sometimes we can manipulate ourselves this way, but it's also an incredibly effective method that people use to persuade each other. It generally works best in increments through what psychologists call the foot in the door phenomenon. People tend to more readily comply with a big request after they've first agreed to smaller, more innocuous requests. Like Darth Vader didn't just go from go get a mannequin to Dark Lord overnight. He was slowly enticed to the dark side by a series of escalating actions and attitude changes. Do this favor for me, now run this errand, now kill these Padawans, now blow up a planet. What started as small actions went on to become big ones, subtly transforming Vader's beliefs about himself and others. There's plenty of experimental evidence that moral action really does strengthen moral convictions, just as amoral action strengthens amoral attitudes. And there is perhaps no better example of this than the Stanford prison experiment. Back in 1971, Stanford psych professor Philip Zimbardo and his team put an ad in the local paper looking for volunteers to participate in a 14-day experiment. After screening around 70 applicants, 24 male college students were deemed physically and mentally fit enough to participate in the study. For their troubles, they'd each be given $15 a day. The participants didn't know the exact nature of the experiment, just that it involved a fake prison situation, and with a coin flip, half were randomly deemed prisoners and the other half guards. The guards were told that it was the prisoners' behavior that was being studied. The prisoners weren't told much of anything, aside from that they'd been arrested and taken to prison. Other than that, neither group had many specific instructions. Zimbardo wanted to observe how each party adapted to their roles. And so, on a quiet Sunday summer morning in Palo Alto, real cops swooped in and arrested the prisoners in their homes under charges of robbery. They were frisked, handcuffed, and read their rights. Back at the station, they were formally booked and then blindfolded in a holding cell wearing only hospital gowns. The researchers had taken great care to make sure that the setting was extremely realistic, which is one reason why they used real cops in the arrest before handing the prisoners over to the fake guards. And it took no time at all for this role-playing to become really, really real. The initial trauma of the humiliation of the arrest, the booking, strip searching, and waiting immediately kicked off a loss of identity in the prisoners. A few prisoners only made it through the first night before they became too emotionally distressed and had to be released. things only went downhill from there. Though the guards could act any way they wanted as long as they didn't physically hurt anyone, encounters quickly became cruel, hostile, and dehumanizing. Guards hurled insults and commands, referred to the prisoners only by number, and put some of them in solitary confinement. Prisoners started breaking down, others rebelled, and still others became passively resigned as if they deserved to be treated so badly. Things got bad enough that the experiment ended after only 6 days, causing relief in the fake prisoners, while interestingly leaving some fake guards feeling angry. Luckily, everyone involved bounced back to normal once out of the prison setting. All of those negative moods and abusive behaviors were situational. And that fact reinforced the important concept that the power of a given situation can easily override individual differences in personality. Although it would never fly by today's ethical standards, Zimbardo's famous study remains influential today because it shed such a harsh light on the nature of power and corruption. And yet, people differ. Many people succumb and become compliant in terrible situations, but not everyone does. Lots of people risk their lives to hide Jewish people in World War II, help runaway slaves along the Underground Railroad, keep Tutsi refugees safe during the Rwandan genocide, or generally refuse to comply or participate in actions they didn't believe in. Some people can and do resist turning to the dark side, even when it seems like everyone around them is going mad. And yet, the fact is, these people tend to be in the minority. So why? Why does it seem so easy to rationalize a negative action or attitude, and so hard to muster the positive ones? One partial explanation comes from American social psychologist Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance. It's one of the most important concepts in psychology. Festinger's theory begins with the notion that we experience discomfort, or dissonance, when our thoughts, beliefs, or behaviors are inconsistent with each other. Basically, we don't like to confuse ourselves. For example, if Bruno is generally considered a peaceful person, but finds himself suddenly punching at his friend over a fender bender, he's likely experiencing some level of cognitive dissonance. So by Festinger's thinking, Bruno might relieve this tension by actually modifying his beliefs in order to match the actions he's already committed. Like telling himself, turns out I'm not such a nice guy after all. Maybe I'm actually a bully. On the other hand, he might resolve his internal tension by changing how he thinks about the situation. He might still think of himself as a peaceful person, but realize that an unusual situation led to an unusual action. Like he'd had a bad day and it was his mom's new car, or his friend was just really asking for it. So he can keep being the ordinarily peaceful guy he was before. It's kind of an inverted fundamental attribution error if you think about it, attributing a person's actions mainly to the situation instead of his personality. The point is that this mismatch between what we do and who we think we are induces tension, cognitive dissonance, and that we tend to want to resolve that tension. That's part of what turns an Anakin into a Darth Vader, and then, if we're lucky, back into an Anakin. Today, you learned that social psychology studies how people relate to each other. We discussed Fritz Heider's attribution theory and fundamental attribution error. You also learned how attitudes can affect actions, like through the dual process theory of persuasion, and also how behavior can change attitudes, like through the foot in the door phenomenon. The Stanford prison experiment illustrated how a situation can override individual differences in personality, while Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance explained how we ease the tension between conflicting thoughts and actions. Thank you for watching, especially to all of our Subbable subscribers who make Crash Course possible for them, but also for everyone else. To find out how you can become a supporter, just go to Subbable.com. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiPastino, and our consultant is Dr. Ranjit Bhagwat. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins, the script supervisor and sound designer is Michael Aranda, and the graphics team is Thought Cafe.
Okay, so kind of pretty interesting stuff. That Stanford prison experiment, by the way, is also a really silly horror movie. If you ever get a chance to watch it, it's pretty over the top. But it is a very fascinating thing where we start to understand that like the situations people are put in start to sort of affect their behaviors, and it is, when we look at like cognitive dissonance, it is very interesting to talk to someone who's like, well, yeah, no, I eat really healthy or I exercise all the time. And it's like they maybe do actually see themselves that way, even if their actions don't necessarily reflect that. Because what will happen is your brain will sort of find a way to explain, maybe some poor behaviors. Like your clients will, we all know that friend who has sort of come up with excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse. And to us, it sounds like it's like, no, it's just sound like a lot of choices that you're making, whereas they're like, oh, these are all things that are outside of my control, really fascinating stuff, but we can definitely influence that in really positive ways. So So let's talk about influencing that, right? So one of the fundamentals of understanding like our social like influences are looking at like our social support, right? And so social support is going to be like the perceived care that we get from another individual, right? So like, again, your parents, your trainer, your teachers, your coworkers, right? This is like how much like influence and support you are getting from sort of an outside source, right? That can be a really important tool for us to use when we're trying to get our clients to change their habits, because a lot of times they might have a big issue with engaging in like a new diet or exercise program, right? Like they could be like, oh man, this is really hard. This is not how I normally live my life. And I'm frustrated. And I just feel like I can't do it, right? Like we as the trainer can kind of come in and say like, hey, no, like you're doing a really great job. Like I'm here to support you and build you up. Like, you've got this, right? There's a couple different types of support that we can give. So there's sort of like four main categories that we're going to see here. We've got emotional support, instrumental support, informational support, and appraisal. And they're all kind of like, influenced by exactly like what they sound like, right? So for instance, like emotional support, right, is like if you are the trainer and you are trying to give your clients emotional support, you want to show them that you are actively listening and that you can demonstrate care for them. You are trying to develop as much trust as possible and you are encouraging them, right? So this is something that I find to be a really important part of like the overall like coaching process, right? It's really important for us to make sure that our client feels as if we've got their best interests at heart, because we should, right? They're hiring us for a job and we are, doing the best to our ability to sort of facilitate this big change that they're trying to make in their life, right? So emotional support, right? We want to listen to our client and let them unload any of their problems, and then we can sort of demonstrate care by being there and like listening to all of that. We want them to trust us, which that is going to sort of come naturally through the latter two. And then we also want to encourage our client. We also want to be very constructive and targeting in terms of like, encouraging our client to push them along the path that we are trying to get to. So we definitely, as a coach, want to display plenty of emotional support. If you can also do this from like the beginning of your relationship with a new individual, like let's say you get like a brand new client that walks through the door and they're looking to like hire some personal trainer. They're there for their 1 hour free fitness assessment, but they don't necessarily have any sessions yet. And you're trying to like, get this person to become like a regular client of yours, get on like a training package of some type. If you can display like a little bit of emotional support in the beginning during like the interview process where you're learning a little bit about their past and their history, and then show that you have their best interests at heart, it's a much more genuine feeling to that potential client than it is in general, right? Like you are displaying empathy and supplying emotional support to them. They're going to feel as if like they trust you, and that's somebody who's gonna want to work with you. So I love to like learn as much as I can about my clients early on so that I can always put my best foot forward and have their interests at heart from the beginning, rather than just like me sort of spouting out things that I happen to be an expert on, and being like, look, I'm the world's greatest trainer. Of course you want to work with me. Like that's not the approach that I'm taking. I want to show somebody that I'm a great trainer, but specifically I'm a great trainer to work with you because I have your interests at heart. That's one of the things that we want to do with emotional support. So we do want to make sure that our clients feel as if our coaching is very genuine to them and has their best interests. We also have instrumental support. This is actually giving someone practical resources to use. So for instance, like when we first started, when quarantine first happened, man, we didn't have Canvas. Like we didn't know I didn't know Canvas existed. We also didn't know we were going to stay on Zoom all that long. So I was literally I was having my students do their homework by like emailing them the homework. And then people would look at they would just read it on their phone or whatever. and then write their answers down on line paper and like text/email it to me. And then I would like grade it and send it back to them. And they didn't really get the chance to like practice all that often, you know. They didn't really get an opportunity to do better and like improve slowly over time. You know, they didn't necessarily have tools that were sort of lifting them up and supporting them on like the success of their journey, you know. And so that's when myself and Mo, we got on the internet and immediately started hunting for like better options, because we want to make sure that you guys are getting the best way to study for this program available, right? And so we wanted to sort of increase the amount of instrumental support that we could supply to our students, right? And these are sort of, these are really things that Mo and I actually have consistently like sat down. These are 4 questions basically that we ask ourselves whenever we are making changes to the program. We're asking like, does it supply emotional, instrumental, informational, and our support? And then appraisal honestly isn't, in my opinion, a type of support. It's a little bit of its own thing. But like, are we doing these sort of 4 key things, right? So instrumental support is giving someone practical resources that they can use. You know, David, I know you take me up on this. Simon and Julio, you know, you guys, whenever we meet in person, right? Like, actually, I think everybody in here is like a note taker now that I think about it. When we meet up in Sochi, I always ask like, who needs like a copy of like a physical copy of the notes from class, right? Not everybody needs it, you know, that's not the support that they need. You know, they're getting it plenty from just reading online, but or like physical copies of the homework and stuff, right? That's an example of instrumental support. You are being handed tools that are going to help you down the path. If you give your client a workout journal, if you give your client like a food journal, you know, I used to do food journals at Christmas as Christmas gifts to all my clients. I would literally just go to the dollar store and pick like a blank, you know, very easy journal. And then I would go, I actually went to like a craft store afterwards, and I would get like little foam and like red and green. I'd put just like a little apple on it. And I'd like glue it to everyone. So it looked like a physical, actual food journal. And then you'd open the front cover and it had my client's like name in it and like a note from me that was like, hey, just wanted to say, or that I'm super excited. And I'd say something different for every client, but it was like, it was always something along the lines of like, you know, this is to help you along your journey and give you the support you need, like, you know, blah, 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 right? It's been a while since I wrote one of those. I can't remember what I used to say, but that's an example of both emotional support, because like the nice note is sort of like demonstrating care, trust, and encouragement. And the instrumental support is like giving them a physical thing that's going to make the journey easier, right? And then we are a constant fountain of what is called informational support, information, advice, suggestions, right? We are just nonstop spouting out informational support to our clients. You know, advice or suggestions on like what they can do and small changes that they make. Again, I probably bring it up every lesson in this class, but we talk about the idea of guided self-help, right? I don't want to do the working out for you. I want to do the planning, but I want you to be engaged in that conversation. I want to do like the actual training, but I want you there so you can do it, right? Like I want to make sure that like I am there to help guide you, but it's really important to me as like a coach to ensure that like my people are taking personal responsibility to do that, because like if you do it for them, you know, they're not developing lifelong skills. So for instance, this weekend I was talking about the difference between when I was working at the Biggest Loser Resort versus like working on the Biggest Loser TV show, right? The TV show was very much just all about like results that would look good on TV, where someone would lose a massive, almost unrealistic, well, absolutely unrealistic, but almost like imaginary sometimes it seemed, amount of like body weight, right? They would lose just insane amounts in very short periods of time. And it was very impressive television. But that's all it was. It was really built around this idea that like just seeing how much someone could lose. And a lot of those people, there's a very famous article that came out a couple years ago talking about like Biggest Loser. There was like a big study. Yeah. There are no winners with The Biggest Loser. Yeah, that's the big one right there, I think. And then here's the New York Times, which sort of did like another bit on it. A lot of people like reported on that initial study. But they were looking at it, and it's because like they were not giving these people tools in order to do it at home. They cared about like the television show. Whereas like where I worked at the resort, like there were mandatory lectures that people had to go to. We would work with people individually so that we could get an idea of what they actually looked like, right? We had a dietitian on staff who would sit down with each and every person individually to figure out like what their lifestyle was and what was going on there and how they can make adjustments, right? They were meeting with us trainers like one-on-one consistently just for conversations, so we can get an idea of what their life looks like and offer informational support, emotional support obviously as well. And then sometimes like my clients, like if they hired me for an extra training session, I would build them workout routines that they could do at home, show them how to modify those things, and have as much instrumental support built into that as possible with like links to the exercises and stuff like that. And then obviously they would always get my email and they could always reach out again later, right? So our clients would lose a substantial amount of weight as well, but then they would also be able to keep it off for a really long time. Versus like when I was working with like the television show, not so much, right? Like that is not the case. They were not getting any of that support. They were just, going through the actions, right? So those are sort of the big three ones. And then there is like a big one that we also want to do. This is something that you kind of have to get from an outside source. But we as the trainer should absolutely always be appraising the situation, evaluating and asking our clients like, hey, is this working? Is this not working? What is sort of the approach here, right? Like we are giving our client feedback and asking them for their feedback as well, right? Like if I was working, like let's say like I'm working with Cyrus, I'd be like, hey Cyrus, like we've been working together for about a month now. I've got a new routine for you. I want to change things up, but I want to ask first, like what in this first month of training has been working for you and what hasn't? What do we need to change? Do you like the schedule that we're on? I've got a couple sessions that have kind of moved around. If you'd like to change your schedule, we can maybe do that. Do you feel like you're getting enough support when it comes to the dietary stuff? Do you need some more resources from me? What's working, what's not, right? That's the appraisal stuff. If I look at like, let's say like we're on this journey and I look at like, the let's say fat loss, right? I might be like, hey, like these numbers aren't quite matching up with our target goals. I know that we're trying to lose like this amount of weight by this amount of time. I'm looking at it, we're not necessarily on track right now. What do you think we should change? I've got a couple suggestions, but I want to hear your thoughts first, right? So again, as the coach, I'm controlling the situation for sure. I'm definitely like guiding it and I'm giving my professional opinion, but I'm also taking the time to like bring my client into that conversation. Because again, this is social, meaning that like it's a relationship between the client and the trainer. Does that make sense, guys? How y'all feel? I feel like I've been on a tear here. Any questions? How y'all feeling so far?
Good, no question.
Fair enough. All righty. Okay, so let's take a look at like what we need to do, right? So as fitness professionals, we need to be able to recognize the social supports that our clients do have, or maybe like the lack of support they might have, right? So we are asking, does our client have like an exercise partner, right? That could be a question that can really kind of like highlight whether or not like they have some support. If they don't have anybody to come to the gym, if they don't have anybody to come to the gym with, it might be difficult for them to motivate themselves to come to the gym, especially if they're like a social person, or do they have someone to like sort of share this experience with, right? Like maybe if they don't necessarily like a gym buddy, it's like, are they sort of interacting with anybody else who might have like similar goals to them, you know? This is one of the reasons why those Peloton bikes and you know, Nordic Trek treadmills and stuff, like in the last few years, they've started, you know, putting like, they put like Wi-Fi into them now so you can hook it up, and then you can like stream actual online classes, and you log in with like a lot of other people and you see how they're doing, and people can actually get to know each other through like these freaking like treadmills and ellipticals and stuff. Like I was reading a brief thing, it wasn't really like, I wouldn't go on an article, but like I was reading a thing about like couple meets on Peloton. I can never spell Peloton right. Yeah, here it is. It's Peloton, the future of online dating, right? Fascinating idea, right? And it's, anyway, this kind of video kind of goes with it. But it's like they talk about like a couple that like met because like they were logging into the same class at the same time every day. And that just kind of goes to show you how powerful social support can be, you know? They saw somebody who had like a very similar goal to them, and they were like, that's very attractive to me. And then like they started chatting, and sure enough, like they were able to like sort of co-motivate each other. And I guess that pivoted into a relationship, which is wild, but so that's something that we as the fitness professional can sort of do, right? We can sort of help our client recognize the social support that they have, or recognize the lack of it, you know? Maybe we can encourage our client to go to a group exercise class, because that is a really good way to reinforce, you know, those habits, right? We can also create strategies to enhance social support. Again, we are doing the guided approach to self-help here, but we are encouraging our clients to share their experiences, right? The more we encourage them, we again take them to a group exercise class, or you know, get them enrolled in something. I used to do when like the iWatch, when the Apple Watch was getting like really popular. And then like pedometer, like Fitbits were like a really huge thing for a little while there. I used to like get all my clients to like group into like one big thing, and we'd have these like fun competitive things where like they could be all competing against each other. And so like that was always like a really good like strategy to sort of like see things. I would have clients who would never meet, but they would like know each other's names. Like my client Peggy was always like an absolute like rock star when it comes to like the getting her steps per week. And all of my other clients like hated Peggy, you know, in a fun way, I should mention, but like they're like, oh, Peggy, she's always beating me on my steps. I always feel like I have to like put in an extra 5,000 a day just to beat her. And I'm like, that's exactly what I want, you know, like that's perfect, you know. So we can come up with some type of strategy to sort of enhance that social support. You know, I've encouraged my clients to go home and share with their spouse the progress that they've made, or share with their friends and family, you know. That's a really great way. It's like, hey, you know, today was a big milestone. Go home and tell somebody. Like, I'm here being your cheerleader, but like go, you know, go get somebody who might not know about this stuff, and tell them how excited you are. And then there's also like social influences that we can use to sort of motivate our clients as well. So this is where we can actually use a little bit of like social pressure in a very positive way, right? Like oftentimes when we talk about like social pressures, we are talking about like peer pressure and things like that, right? And oftentimes, poor Chris, he keeps trying to log in and like keeps getting, I can't get him in here. You know, we see our social influences. We can use this to motivate our clients, right? Like, I'm not saying like, hey, you should exercise because all the cool kids are doing it. You know, that's not the approach we're taking here. But like, we can use social pressures in very constructive, positive ways to make it easier for our clients to adopt healthy behaviors, right? Again, this is one of the things where even just like, do you guys remember being in like, and if you've got kids, you might remember like you've probably seen this in school, because I think they probably they of course they still do it. But do you remember like how you could like, if you read a little book or something, like in my school what it was is like if you read a book you would get like a little star on the wall, and if you read another book you get another star. And like you know, those would sort of like build up over the year, and like kids will get competitive and things like that. And so when you see that, you're like, oh God, I need to read more books so I can get more stars on the freaking wall, you know, like. And I remember like being in a race with this girl that I was like really interested in, like, you know, but when, and I was like, by the way, I was like a little child, so, you know, but I remember having like kind of a little like kid crush on this girl, and she had a bajillion stars on that wall, and I was like, all right, well, I'm going to impress her by, you know, reading. That was like a social pressure that sort of enhanced my healthy behaviors. You know, like reading books is healthy and very good for you, you know, intellectually and emotionally and stuff. And so that was like one of the things that kind of like, you know, I remember that as like a kid, and I look back on it now and I'm like, oh God, like, you know, my motivations were a little goofy, but like, that is how we sort of we can sort of encourage certain social pressures to enhance target behaviors, right? Again, if your workout partner is showing up at the gym every time, you know, you are holding each other accountable, because like there's going to be a morning where they're going to wake up, right? And they're going to be in their nice, warm, cozy bed, and they're going to be like, oh, it's so cozy. I don't want to go to the gym today. Then they're going to go, oh, but Julio's already there. Okay, I gotta go. You know, and then they're gonna crawl out of bed. Like you're, you know, they're, and like they'll show up and they'll be like, look, listen, I'm only here because of you. You know, like then it's like, that's great. Like that's exactly what we're going for. It's like that little bit of like social pressure got them out there. And now like they're gonna do their workout, they're gonna feel great afterwards. That's awesome, right? So again, we can sort of like enhance this these target behaviors through like social pressures in very positive ways, right? Obviously, this has been used for negative reasons, you know, throughout history a million times, but not the way we are going to use it. So there's a couple different types of social influences, right? Like I said, there is when it comes to the way that we make decisions as like a group, right? We have what is called like informative social influence. And so like informative social influence is where somebody might not have an opinion on something. So what they'll do is they'll do a little bit of research on the internet, or they will call a friend or a family member, or they'll talk to an expert, watch a video, something like that. They'll do a little bit of like research, and that will sort of help guide their decision making. You know, this is one of the reasons why, like, I am personally not a huge fan of most fitness gurus, because a lot of times, you know, they are boiling information down to very basic versions of things, and then people are taking that as like black and white information. I think that if you are in a position of educational influence like that, I think you have a responsibility to make sure that you are explaining to people like, hey, you know, this isn't necessarily the end all be all way to do things. This is just like one approach to it, right? Like, again, like if you ask, and it makes sense, like you're going to say that the best thing is what you are an expert in, you know? Poor credit. I tried again. I can't get him in here. So like me, like I'm always going to encourage people to diet and exercise in order to like make themselves healthier, whereas like a doctor might prescribe some type of medication, a therapist is going to look at like habits. Come on, Chris, let's get you in here. There it is. What's up, man? I could not get you in here. I'm sorry, Chris. I don't know what was going on. I don't know if it's your phone or it didn't want to connect, or if it's my computer didn't want you here, but I could not get you in here. But I'm glad you're here now. Yeah, so that's sort of informative social influence, right? It's you make your clients are going to make their decisions based on the information that they've sort of been exposed to, right? And you know, unfortunately, in the age of the internet, there's a lot of crappy information out there. So a lot of times, like that's sometimes our job is to sort of work to overcome this negative informative social influence that's out there. You know, keto is the only diet that's going to work. It's like, no, that's not fair to say, you know, or you know, carnivore diet is the only way to do it, or like this or that, you know. you're putting out a lot of information, and like you are supplying informational influence on people when you do stuff like that, right? Now, that being said, if you have like an opinion on things that you think is the best way to do things, that's fine. But you do need, I think that like when you are in a position like that, you have a responsibility to inform, like, I think this is the best version, right? Like David, we were talking about the Brad Schoenfeld book. In my opinion, Brad Schoenfeld is like the guru out there right now that's like all about just like, he's done meta-analysis, which is, we kind of talked about that pyramid the other day, right? Which is the most valuable sort of type of information. And so I think that it's like been scientifically studied in really positive ways. I would say that that's a really valuable source. But if another physical therapist or exercise physiologist or whatever wrote like a really good book, it's absolutely fair to say that maybe that information is on par or even better than the other stuff. And this is why like stuff needs to continually change, especially in the realm of like, science. My roommate says this all the time, and I've adopted this every now and then. But when people will, like my parents will do this, like my dad, he likes to get a little antagonistic sometimes in fun ways. And he'll be like, he's like, well, you said like, you do things this way. Like what happened to that? And my favorite response to that is, damn, it was true then, but it's not true now. Yeah, like moving on, it was true for me then, but it doesn't make any sense now. So that's informative social influence. People will look for information in order to make a decision, but sometimes people are making decisions just in the effort to belong to a certain group. Look at fashion is a perfect example of that. Like I definitely for a really long time, like I still do. I think I have like a pair of like brown dress shoes, a pair of black dress shoes. I have a pair of sandals, my cleats, the shoes that I'm wearing right now, trail runners, which are, more for like, getting like nice and muddy. And I got a pair of white Vans, and I was like, why do I need white Vans? Because I would just wear the trail runners, and my roommate, who is much more fashionable than I am, was like, no, you can't do that. Like there are rules to how you're supposed to look. It's like, if you're gonna, and you got to dress better. And I'm like, why? Like, who cares, and that opinion comes from a place of like normative social influence. We as a society have sort of agreed that like, you wear dark blue jeans and a white pair of shoes, that's a really clean look. Why? I couldn't tell you. Why don't we wear brown black shoes with a brown belt? That's not allowed. I could not tell you why, but I do know that it's sort of a rule, and I do know that I don't want to stick out like a sore thumb, so I follow that rule, like so that's sort of like how like normative social influence works, right? We make decisions in the effort to belong to a group. So if you want to sort of like, let's say you want your life to sort of reflect like a certain way of living, you want your life to be the the way that maybe you've seen on somebody else's life, right? Well, then you start surrounding yourself with like those type of people. There are definitely like a few people I play frisbee with. I mean, most of my people that I play frisbee with are like some of my closest friends, but there are a couple people out there that like kind of just ignore. I play with them, I'm glad they're there as like a body, I wish them a healthy, happy life, but I have no interest in like hanging out with them, because like to me, I don't like, I want my life to be shaped very differently than theirs, and that's being aware of the normative social influence that we have. When someone has like an unhealthy lifestyle and that is influencing your life, that is, you are making your decisions in order to like belong to that group. But if you as the individual don't necessarily want to belong to that group, or you want your life to be shaped in a slightly different way, sometimes it involves like building different social circles, and that's a really important thing. Like I don't really hang out, like my roommate put this really well. This is kind of a funny thing that another one of my roommates have done. This is a friend of mine from high school who lives, became my roommate down here actually. We both moved from Oregon. But he is like not a religious person by any capacity, but he hangs out with like a lot of like church going like Christian folks. And I've been around many times where people have asked him like why he doesn't go to church. He's like, I just don't really believe in any of that. And they're like, well, you hang out with so many people who do. And he's like, yeah. He's like, well, I think that like, all of those people are really friendly, and I think they're, the way they treat other people match up really well with the way I want to be treated and how I want to treat people. And I think that like, their lifestyle is very similar to my own, even if my religious beliefs are not. And I love that answer. I think that like that's a really great example of like, how he has sort of surrounded himself with people that like live the lifestyle that he wants to live. And I think that if we can encourage that in our clients, that's a really powerful, way to live your life. We all want to surround ourselves with people who are similar to us or maybe challenge us in certain ways, which is really great. We want to make sure that like we are trying to belong to that group, one of the things that attracts me to my girlfriend insanely is that she's very ambitious, and I love having like a very ambitious go-getter person in my life. And then we also both love like doing like lots of stuff, so we were always just like on the go. I love that. Like I'm excited to surround myself with someone who pushes me and also is similar to me. So your clients, you can be that influence. This is another reason why like we want to practice what we preach, is because we are trying to have a normative social influence on our clients that inspires them to sort of shape their life in a very healthy way as well. So so those are sort of like where this is all kind of coming from. And it's like I said, it's a very fascinating sort of cool thing to kind of look at when you realize how much control you actually do have over your own life, because sometimes it can feel like you have sort of a lack of control. It can sort of feel like life happens to you rather than you happen to life, or you, that's not how that phrase goes. Life happens to you instead of you happen to live. That's sometimes what it feels like. So we want to kind of flip that. So let's talk about compliance. Cyrus, you're the new guy here. You haven't heard the big spiel on compliance yet, but we definitely talked a lot about this. For the rest of you, we talked a lot about this last module in the weight loss class, because compliance when it comes to weight loss is probably one of the most important things we have. So when I say compliance, what I mean is a client who is sticking to the program, right? They're following the fitness professional suggestions. Now, here's the thing. Like you will have plenty of non-compliant clients. That doesn't mean that they are not trying their best. It could mean that they think they are doing things exactly the way they're supposed to. How many times have you heard somebody say, guys, think about this, because you'll have 5,000 examples probably. How many times have you heard someone say, oh, I'm so frustrated with this diet, or I'm so frustrated with this quitting smoking or changing it, like saving money, like I do everything I'm supposed to do and I never get anywhere. Right? I stuck to the diet, I did the exercise program, like, and it's like it didn't work. I hear that once a day, and so like what we start to realize is it's like this person is putting as much effort in as possible to do what they think is going to be effective, but it turns out that it just might not be, because maybe they're not complying to the program. They're not doing the things they're supposed to do, even if they think they are, right? Somebody who does a diet program and then doesn't see any results, maybe they're not actually sticking to that diet program. Maybe maybe they've misjudged portion sizes. They're like, I'm supposed to have a 4-ounce chicken breast at lunch. I did that every single day for 8 weeks and didn't see any results. And then you look at like what they think 8 ounces is, like, oh, probably an extra 100 calories just in that chicken breast alone, because that's actually close to like 12 ounces. Little changes like that, or little understandings of things like that can really have an influence. So non-compliant clients are clients who show resistance to change. And a lot of times this is very involuntary, like I said. So we are looking at we're trying to measure our clients' adherence, right? We want them to adopt these healthy behaviors by adhering to the program. This is, again, one of the reasons why I love journals, right? My Fitness Pal, straight up workout journals. With my client that I'm going to meet with today, we have a little online Excel spreadsheet that we both check regularly, that we both have access to and can both edit. So she'll like do something and I'll leave a little note and reply, right? That is increasing her adherence to a program, right? We are trying to get our clients to adopt as many healthy behaviors as are possible, right? Now, the things that get in the way are what we call barriers, right? Barriers are some type of obstacle that kind of gets in the way. Now, here's the thing. Barriers are often thought of as very negative, and most of the time they are, right? They're things that sort of keep us from doing certain things, but sometimes they can also be very positive, where they are actively pulling us away from certain things, you know? So like, again, I am trying to get like more sleep in my life and be better about it. But last night I had a chance to go see The Batman at like 9:30 p.m. and that is a 3-hour movie. That is not very conducive to getting a good night's sleep. That was a positive barrier. It was something very fun that pulled me away from like a healthy behavior, right? And now you're seeing I am all bleary-eyed because I also had to get up at like 6:30 to take care of a small puppy this morning, you know? So like, not a lot of sleep, gonna need an afternoon nap. Totally, this positive thing pulled me away from the sort of healthy behavior I want to do. So the one thing that's more fun than something else, so it pulls our attention away, right? Now, here's the thing. If you look at like CrossFitters, right, those classes are really fun. So that is a positive barrier that might pull them away from you know, an unhealthy behavior. So I wouldn't necessarily, yeah, it's a barrier, but it's like, instead of pulling away from their health goal to go towards something new, maybe this is something that is so fun that it pulls them towards their health goal away from an unhealthy behavior, right? And that's how we can use positive barriers to our advantage. Your training sessions should be fun. Your clients should be stoked and excited to meet with you every single session. That's part of being a good coach, right? And then there are negative barriers, right? Negative barriers are just barriers that prevent progress because of the unfavorable circumstances, right? So unpleasant barriers are like, your client is like, no, I hate working out. You know, there's like, I'm going to be sore, right? That's a negative barrier. They're like, I'm already sore. I don't want to go to the gym. You know, yeah, absolutely, right? That is definitely a negative barrier. But again, negative barriers can also be used in a way very positively by the coach to enhance target behaviors, right? You could say, you know, you have to show up on time because if you don't, like, this negative thing will happen, right? And there's sort of the response cost approach to behavior change that we talked about last week, right? So we can definitely use positive and negative social barriers, but a lot of times it just starts with us becoming aware of what our clients' natural positive barriers are. Somebody might enjoy drinking alcohol more than they enjoy doing, you know, a healthy behavior. Somebody might dislike doing that healthy behavior because they're hot and sweaty and they don't like being hot and sweaty, right? If I got a client who hates being hot and sweaty, great, come work out with me. I will supply you with an air conditioner. You know, like I will carry a fan with you. I will fan you with palm fronds if I have to, but get to the freaking gym, you know, like, let's remove that negative barrier. If they've got something that they enjoy doing better, which like sitting on the couch playing video games, I want to make sure that like my sessions are fun and engaging. You know, let's talk about how we can level up your life rather than your, you know, video game. So those are sort of our barriers, right? And like, we are going to have a natural bias towards like one, you know, situation or behavior or another, right? So we do have what are called like our social biases. And these are like attitudes towards like a specific group or maybe like specific people, right? Our biases affect our views on like gender, age, ethnicity, race, everything. Like, we are all built in with like these biases, right? And it's not, this isn't positive or negative. This is just something that sort of happens naturally. It's sort of a biologic way that our brains are sort of wired, right? You are naturally biased towards people that are like, similar to you, right? There's actually a really weird, if you ever want to read about this thing, there's this area called the Uncanny Valley. And what the Uncanny Valley is it's where there's like a dip. It is very interesting, but we are generally like physically attracted to people that look somewhat similar to us in general, right? Or like they have like, and obviously like this is just physical attraction. There's plenty of other ways to like, become attracted to a person, but like generally it's like somewhat similar to our group. And so they'll see like attraction will kind of go like this in terms of like how more similarly they look to like people you grew up around or things like that. And then all of the sudden it just goes whoosh like this. And it goes into this like big dip where it's like, oh no, that person is not attractive at all. And then it kind of starts to come back up the further you get away from looking like it. And what that dip is where they look similar, they look more similar, they look more similar. Oh my God, they look too similar. That could be my mom. And so they call it the Uncanny Valley. And it's where if they look really similar to where like you might be related, our brain instantly sort of turns off to that. And so like that is sort of like, a naturally innate bias that we might have, right? There are a million biases in the realm of exercise as well. People who think, I like weightlifting. I am biased toward thinking that is the most effective way to make a healthy, happy person. Other people they might say that it's running. Other people might say that it's spin class. Other people might say it's swimming, yoga, right? Those are all of like our biases, right? And so we can use those biases if we learn how to like recognize them and help our clients understand that like they have this sort of predisposition towards like a certain opinion. If we can help people recognize their own biases, they can start to sort of like overcome how, those biases might have like a control on that person, right? So how do they develop those biases? Well, a lot of times it does come from things like peer pressure. So peer pressure is like pressure from your peers, this is exactly what it sounds like. It's where an individual adopts certain behaviors, values, attitudes in order to belong to a group around them, right? So, I come from a particularly, very rural area, very small town, 10,000 people in the town that I'm from. And so because it is sort of a secluded community, very small town, in that town, everybody kind of has like a lot of very similar opinions, because everyone's just trying to belong to like a similar peer group. Obviously there's going to be outliers, it's not perfect, but like understanding that like the reason our opinions are the way, we're probably getting most of our opinions from our parents, our family, our friends, and things like that, because we're experiencing some type of like pressure from that, right? Some social pressure there. And so some of it can be very positive. Oftentimes it can be extremely detrimental. And so it can be very detrimental if people are sort of putting pressure to pull someone away from a healthier lifestyle that maybe they're trying to adopt. It can be very positive if, they are trying to like, fit into like a specific group. I definitely know that like, when I go to I got to play Ultimate in Hawaii, which was really fun. I found a pickup game out there and met a bunch of dudes and got to play with them. But I didn't know like what their game was like. And so like, I didn't want to come in and be like, I'm play a certain way. So I kind of took it pretty easy early on. And there were a couple plays that like, I didn't take it easy and like made some really good, really good plays. But then I noticed that everyone else was kind of playing much more casually. And so I kind of slowed down after that because like, I don't want to be the weirdo, rude new dude who like comes in and messes up their game. I felt a little bit of pressure where I was like, oh, I'm going to dial it back a notch. My girlfriend even, she's like, you're like jogging. And I was like, yeah, I'm trying not to like sprint around too hard. I had a lot of fun still, you know. But like it was just an older group, you know, not necessarily as competitive as I'm used to playing with. That's fine. You know, I have a bias towards like one style of play, but like that peer pressure can sort of steer me away. I had a lot of fun playing in a way that I don't normally do. And I definitely took more like throws, which was actually kind of fun. Normally I'm kind of a receiver, but I ended up being much more of what is called a handler that day. So when it comes to like influencing healthy behaviors, right? If we're trying to influence our clients to engage in like healthy diet and exercise, right? You know, we need to sort of analyze what's going on in our outside of our client's life that might be pulling them away, right? So inactive lifestyles, they could just naturally have been surrounded by that their whole life. And so they are sort of naturally predisposed to an inactive lifestyle and unhealthy eating habits, right? They might really like certain types of junk food, or they might just be a bit of a couch potato. And I know it's kind of a, you know, negative term that I don't use very often, but like, yeah, somebody could just be a pretty generally sedentary person. Like, love my mom to death, but like, she definitely loves watching a movie much more than, well, she loves gardening beyond anything else. Actually, if she could garden 24 hours a day, she would just do that. But I'd say like she beyond that, like she likes like watching movies and stuff. And so like it's important for me to encourage her to do more of the gardening because that's a physically active thing that's going to keep her healthy, rather than like, you know, watching The Walking Dead for the fourth time. You know, my mom freaking loves that show. Could be financial distress. Good Lord. This will pull you away from your habits. You know, financial distress will absolutely sort of pull us away from our healthy lifestyles we're trying to engage in. Certain social behaviors, you know, like social influences, wanting to belong to like a specific friend group can definitely pull us away from certain things. Life roles, you know, like parents, they have a responsibility to take care of their kids. It becomes very challenging sometimes for parents to have the time in their life to work on themselves. That's tough, you know. That's a social influence where they're like a leader, and they are, you know, they have to take care of like these tiny humans, you know, and if they don't, they're, you know, they're trying to like shape the best life for them possible, and a lot of times they do it at the expense of themselves. Julio, you've got a little one, right? Actually, if you usually work in the mornings, you might not be available to chat right now. But if I ask any parent in here, Cyrus, I'm sure, like, you know, or anybody who's got little ones at some point, right? You've probably had dinner in the kitchen. I think that's like what most parents have told me. You know, they're oftentimes like, you know, they'll sit down and eat with their kids, but a lot of times they're also just like trying to get their life together. And so they're just scarfing down food whenever they can get it. You know, that's a classic sort of parent thing that I've heard from so many of my clients over the years, you know, and they're like, God, it's just, I have no idea. I'm like, let's track your calories. And they're like, I can't track it. There's no world in which I can track calories, you know, because like, yeah, there's a social influence there that's pulling them away. So we want to create social influences that sort of facilitate exercise, that sort of facilitate nutritional progress, right? So we have like physical activity recommendations. That's an example of like informational support, right? The idea that like the USDA, right? Or I'm sorry, the CDC puts out, you know, let's see, if I go CDC recommendations for exercise, you're going to see it'll say 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity per week, or they can get 75 minutes of high intensity activity per week. Can I get a much bigger? Oh, okay, that's actually pretty big. So if they can get 150 minutes a week of physical activity, that's enough to stave off some of the negative effects of an unhealthy lifestyle. And you know, it's funny, I know you guys have heard me say this before, right? I've said 150 minutes per week, or 75 minutes of high intensity work, but they are modifying it lately. This is actually the new recommendations that are starting to come out, where they are also now encouraging at least 2 days a week of strength training. and I am stoked about it. They've been talking about this for a little while now, where they're starting to engage in like aerobic strength training, not just aerobic, but strength training exercise, working specifically on like posture and things like that. So 150 minutes, moderate, or 75 vigorous. And if some of it can be muscle strengthening, you're gonna be in a great place. So there's sort of like a couple of different examples here, right? So go for a walk, 30 minutes, 5 days a week, and 2 days of strength training, all major muscle groups. Or, you know, example 3 here is sort of a mix of moderate to vigorous, on 2 days a week and 2 days of like strengthening. And that's great, you know. One of the reasons why like I love a good total body routine, you know, I work on strength, let's say Mondays and Thursdays, work on cardio, Tuesdays and Fridays, 4 days a week. It's the bare minimum, you know. Now, if you're trying to like get specific results like bodybuilding, you kind of got to go beyond that. But like that's all it takes to sort of fend off the negative effects of like a sedentary lifestyle, you know. And then we've also got informational support from like choosemyplate.gov. This website's amazing. You know, if you go to my plate, you can see it has got so many resources right here. We've got printable materials, we've got graphics. You know, here's berries 5 ways, you know, love this, right? It's just a little like, you know, how to do some really fun stuff with berries to increase your vitamin and mineral intake. Here's brown rice 5 ways. I'm actually kind of interested in this because I get kind of tired of eating brown rice. Fried or maybe a casserole. I'm actually not super interested in all these, but yeah, so there's some really cool ways. Those are all examples of like informational support provided by like a very credible source, like the USDA, right? Like that is, it's like if you are trying to adhere to like social influences like peer pressure, you know, you're going to listen to a you know, large organization like the USDA. And so we've got a little bit of normative there, and we've got a little bit of informative, you know, social support happening there, and that's influencing our clients' thoughts and their behaviors and their opinions and stuff. So when we look at this, we're trying to figure out how to like implement the correct interventions with our clients. In order to do this, we kind of need to understand these 3 main things. This is sort of what we see when we look at like social cognitive theory, right? This is how we understand the way that people learn and make specific behaviors. There are certain personal factors at play here. Their behaviors are going to influence their actions, right? And their environment. But these are all sort of connected. These arrows go in both directions. Your environment can affect your behaviors. Behavior can affect your environment. This is what we saw in the prison study, the Stanford prison experiment, right? This is what we saw. We saw like the environment affected behaviors, but then like their behaviors affected their environment. Like people, you know, once they sort of got out, they were only in there for days, right? But that like very harsh negative environment affected like, you know, how they came home, and then they changed their environment. There's really some interesting stuff about how you'll hear like people will come back from serving in like a branch of the military, and they'll have a hard time like, you know, adjusting to like a sort of civilian lifestyle again. And so like they'll start to sort of change their environment in certain ways. They'll get like a stiffer mattress, for instance. I've heard that one. That's like kind of a go-to example I've heard. There's like I think there's a line in one of the Marvel Captain America movies where he talks about how he's like, the hard part is, you know, adjusting. He's like I sleep on the floor sometimes. I've never known any of my clients or to do that, but like, yeah, absolutely. Your behaviors can affect personal factors in your life, and your environment can affect personal factors in your life. And so we do know that like, you know, your social and your physical environment has an effect, right? On like how we think about things, how we feel about things, you know, how we reason things. And this is where we do see that all the stuff we were watching in that video there, right? So we want to enhance our positive behaviors as much as possible. Again, we're paying attention to how much self-efficacy our clients have, right? We're trying to enhance their self-efficacy. Efficacy is the belief that you have in your ability to perform like specific tasks, right? The fake it till you make it approach really does work very, very well. And so like if we're trying to create like exercise efficacy, we want our client to have the belief that they can perform a specific exercise. So we teach them how to do something that they can master, and then we grow it beyond that to make it more complicated. And we continually remind our clients like, well, remember how hard it was to do this, and now you're doing that. That's great, right? And then next time, like, we make it even harder. It's like, remember when it was hard to do this, but then you overcame it, right? And so that is going to increase their efficacy, their belief that they are capable of improving in exercise. And then the same thing is true of like groups of people, by the way. Groups of people being able to achieve a specific task. This is where like team building exercises come in. You go, you and your friends go do like an escape room or something. You and your friends go do like a ropes course or something. It builds a collective sort of efficacy. If you believe that you're surrounding yourself with an effective team, you are much more likely to work even harder within that team. And that's why, it's always important to sort of surround yourself with the types of people that you want to be surrounded by. Modeling is another really big one, right? You are a role model for your clients. So pursuing healthy behaviors and, sharing like self stories with your clients to tell, and highlight ways that like you are engaging in these healthy behaviors. Yeah, that's a really important part of being a role model for your clients. And then obviously there is like the self-regulation part of things. We do want to give our clients the ability to sort of self-regulate, right? Again, guided self-help here, right? So where our clients are setting goals, those goals are going to be self-determined, right? You're there to sort of help them. It's like they make a goal that isn't necessarily like specific. You're like, let's get a little bit more specific, but that's fine. But the goal itself, like the core goal, is still really, it's still your clients, right? At the end of the day. Journaling, right? We know that self-monitoring is just a super effective tool that helps people adhere to like specific programs. So regulating that through like journaling is going to be a super effective tool. And then developing a reward system is actually really helpful. Teaching your clients like, hey, what's your favorite thing? Well, if we engage in this physical activity, we get to do our favorite thing afterwards, right? That's one of the really cool sort of bits that we do see here. We want to encourage our clients to engage in healthy behaviors by rewarding them for those healthy behaviors. So there's sort of three main techniques that you're going to use here that are going to be really effective at doing this, right? So one of those is what we call the foot in the door technique. This is a series of small requests that are made that will get your clients to do something more intense later on. This is sometimes called the Benjamin Franklin effect. But if we look this up, Benjamin Franklin effect. So the Benjamin Franklin effect, he was quoted as saying, someone who has done you a favor is much more likely to do you another than someone you have obliged. Similarly, someone who has done you harm is much more likely to harm you again. And what he means is like, it's kind of funny here. If you want to become friends with someone, ask them for a favor. That sounds really weird. Like, somebody who sort of dislikes you, why would they want to do you a favor? But we as people actually do like doing favors in general, because then we feel as if we are accomplished and successful. So Benjamin Franklin believed that if you would ask someone for a very small request, they are much more likely to do a larger request for you again later, because their brain is already sort of in that mode. So like if I wanted my client to engage in regular physical activity, let's say 5 days per week, I might start them on a program where they only do a couple days of exercise in the beginning, adhere to it, and then we can sort of make that task bigger, right? Again, my favorite piece of nutrition advice with new clients is I just tell them, I want you to give me a couple weeks of eating as colorfully as possible. Then we will start talking about specific meal plan stuff. So it's like, if you can just incorporate vegetables or fruits into every meal and get a lot more color on your plate for a couple weeks consistently, then we'll work on the bigger stuff later. That's a very small ask that will eventually become a much larger one. Now, there is also the exact opposite of this. This is called the door in the face technique. And this is where a lot of times like sales will do this. You ask a huge, ridiculous request of whoever it is you're trying to influence that you know is going to be rejected. And then you make a much more reasonable request afterwards. It makes that reasonable request seem a lot more effective. I just saw, let's see if I can find this, door in the face pricing. Yeah, I mean, here's the classic example where you're like, hey, can I borrow $100? And they're like, no. And it's like, well, can I borrow $10? And it's like, okay, sure. Because if you just straight up asked for $10, they might be like, no, of course not, right? Like, but if you ask for $100 first, they might go, well, I guess $10 is a much better deal. Yeah, sure. Oh God, I wish I could find pricing strategy. Oh man, I just saw this meme the other day and I thought it was so funny, or so clever rather. And it was where this guy was offering, I think it was like sort of the opposite of what you normally see. Normally when you see pricing, it's like you get 3 of these things. Let's say you could sell like 5 items, or you sell an item for $5 each. Or you can get 3 items, let's say for like $10, right? What that does is that makes somebody decide to buy the $10 option because they think they're getting a really good deal, right? They're like, oh, well, basically I'm getting one, I'm buying 2 and getting 1 free. So they feel like it's a really good deal. But there is actually also the opposite of that. There is also pricing something individually for $4 and then offering 2 of them for like $9. Now, you could just buy 2 individual ones for $8. Why would you buy the 2-pack for $9? So when people see that, they sometimes feel like they are getting a really good deal. So they're much more likely to purchase it. They have whoever priced that out has actually no intention of selling the 2-pack. They don't think it will because it's kind of a bad deal, right? But people feel like they're getting like a secret, like sneaky deal by doing it the other way. That is sort of what the door in the face technique is, right? You ask something really big that you know is going to get shot down, right? So I would say to my clients, like, all right, well, we are going to do 100 burpees today. And they're like, what? No. And it's like, all right, fine. 10 burpees. And they're like, yeah, I'll do 10. Right now, normally, if you just ask, that would be that's the door in the face technique, right? You basically ask to get this door slammed in your face. And then there's that's not all. That's not all. Is sort of just making your offers as pleasing as possible. That's not all technique is being like, hey, if you exercise, it's really good for your bone density, and it's good for your posture, and it's good for your muscles, and you're gonna look better, and you're gonna feel better, and lay it on. We're just trying to be as positive as possible with our clients, trying to influence them and push them towards adopting these healthy behaviors. So here's how we can actually sort of get our clients. Here's where we can sort of apply this stuff, right? Number one, we want to encourage our clients to make their health a priority, right? We want them to sit down and say, this is very important to us. Yes, we have other things that are important to us as well, but we have room in our life to make this as important, right? Take your time to make your life better through activity and physical exercise, right? Then let's sit down and talk about how we can make this an easy thing to do. Let's problem solve, right? Let's talk about maybe what's holding you back, what's getting in the way, how do we remove those obstacles, or how do we get past them, right? I had a client, again, best problem solving I've ever done. He would always stop by fast food. And he was like, I don't know why I do it. It's there. And so I do it. And I was like, all right, well, now we're going to take an inefficient path home. And he was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, like from now on, we are going to drive the non-fast food route. And that is going to be the path you go to get to work every day and to get home every day. And that small change worked, he ended up having to take, maybe an extra 5 minutes on his commute, but like he also ended up losing an extra 5 pounds, here or there, whatever it was. There we go, right? That's an effective use of problem solving. And then you as the coach, you can also help to define your client support system, right? You can assess it and say, this is something that's either pulling you away or moving you towards like your goal. Again, if we get our clients enrolled in like our group exercise class, that can be a really good way for our clients to experience like enhanced social support. Orange Theory Fitness does a really good example, right? You look at it, it's a group exercise class where everybody gets to know each other every time. Like this is a large group of people who all get to know each other, and they, become like a social circle, right? And then like they miss Tuesday session, they show up on Thursday, and everybody goes, "Where were you on Tuesday? We missed you." And so then they're like, "Oh God, I gotta make sure I don't miss this Tuesday coming up." They're already thinking of the future and making sure they actually show up and engage, right? Again, this is why CrossFit's so effective. CrossFit may be a cult, but it worked real well. Always pay attention to your clients' attitudes on things. That way you can sort of get an idea of like what their opinions are, what their biases are, where their peer pressures lie. Check their attitudes to make sure that they actually match their behaviors. That's not always the case. Sometimes there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, where somebody will sort of have one opinion. They're like, "Oh yeah, no, it's really important to engage in a healthy lifestyle and, eat healthy or whatever." Meanwhile, they're over there smoking a cigarette. That's like, those two things are what? And it's like, yeah, and then they find a way to like sort of explain it away. We can there's always a way to explain things away, like doesn't necessarily mean that it's always even true, actually. So then we can sort of like, make sure that our client's attitudes like, kind of shine a light on that. It's like, you said you were doing this, but this is clearly in conflict with that. Let's talk about why, right? And then we can sort of get them to understand that cognitive dissonance. We can assess our client's social support. That's always a really big one. Get to know a little bit of information about their friends or family, what their true motivations are. And then probably the biggest one, we are there to provide positive feedback and encouragement for our clients. So your information. Now, obviously, there are like lots of like social influences here. Like I said, there's different like sort of like set biases that we might have. They might come from like different race, ethnicities, or cultures. Your clients will have like traditional values that they are maybe like they have been influenced by them through like their social circles they grew up with. Great, right? Here are sort of the obesity rates that are sort of associated with like different like populations that are out there, right? Senior clients, right? They're going to have like different opinions than like maybe a younger person is going to have, right? And so identifying like their sort of demographics and understanding those things is a big part of understanding like social aspects of influence, right? Not saying any of them are right, not saying any of them are wrong, but they are definitely having an effect on us. You, me, our friends, our family, we are all influenced by the culture around us. We are all influenced by the people around us. And so we are going to have natural opinions on what we think is best based on those things. If we come up with new information, then it's kind of our responsibility to interpret that information to the best of our ability. And if that means changing our opinions, then that's okay. That's what we're always trying to encourage our clients to sort of understand, right? Just because like they watched an episode of Dr. Oz and Dr. Oz said something is healthy, it's like sometimes it's like, well, you've been doing that for a long time and you're not getting the results you want to receive, right? So maybe let's try something else, right? I always say this is like one of my favorite sort of phrases here, but again, like an example of like form following function. One of the things that I always try to help my clients understand is that your life is perfectly shaped to give you whatever results it is that you are getting right now. Now, you don't necessarily have control over all of those aspects of your life, So if there's something in your life that you are born with, or, sort of naturally inherited, then yeah, you don't necessarily have control over that, right? But let's say you want your life to be a little bit different, then you can change the shape of something that you do have control over in order to get the results that you want, right? But whatever it is, all of our lives are designed perfectly right now to give us the results we are receiving right now. Some people are born with an advantage, some people are born with a disadvantage, but you want to change your life? I think that's super motivating because it's like, yeah, I can shape it however I want it to through like effort and practice, you know? And I'm always trying to encourage my clients to do that, especially whenever I think of like social cognitive theory, right? I'm always encouraging my clients to take ownership of like ways that it's like, what do you want your life to be? Here's how you're going to make those changes. Let's figure it out together, you know? So using all of this, depending on where our clients are in these stages of change, we got a lot of, they throw the most examples here, but like, honestly, if you got a client in pre-contemplation who really isn't even considering making a change right now, the biggest one right here at the bottom, in my opinion, and honestly, it's the one that comes up the most often, is just education. Educate your client. Well, they're probably not your client, but educate somebody and increase their awareness on the importance of whatever, right? And that informative social influence will push them into maybe starting to think about changing their mind, right? Contemplation is somebody who's thinking about changing, right? This is where we want to get them involved in like such a way that they can see themselves engaging in this, right? So maybe discuss with their family members, or I mean, have them discuss with their family members some of the benefits of adopting like a healthy lifestyle, right? Or how would they see themselves in this healthy lifestyle? Would they see them, you know, what do they think their life would look like with this healthy lifestyle? When they start to see that, they might start thinking about like, you know, taking the leap to engage in these healthy lifestyles and actually adopting these new habits. If they're a preparation client who's like really considering it now, you know, maybe changing sometime in the next 30 days, right? Let's get them like to sort of schedule an appointment with, you know, their trainer or maybe like a workout partner, and, you know, get a sort of schedule for this. Maybe share their goals with somebody else. That's also a really big one because then it's out there in the world, you know. I always encourage my clients to share their goals. The more they do that, the more there's like that social pressure to meet those goals, because none of us want, you know, other people to sort of see us not succeed. Or maybe we just get them to attend a class, you know, attend like one, you know, dip their toe in the water, right? Remember, preparing level clients will actually engage in these new habits just a little bit during that 30 days. They're not necessarily going regularly. They're not taking action yet, but they'll dip their toes in the water. So great, let's get them to maybe attend like a group exercise class or something like that. If we got a client in the action stage, maybe actually developing like a plan of action specifically. So we go to that sort of action plan approach that we talked about during the problem solving methods. Or maybe we have them like begin like some type of challenge that's going to keep them motivated for the month, like a step challenge. I used to enroll all my clients into these like step challenges where all my clients were like competing with one, not all of my clients, but like a lot of my clients were competing with one another. My favorite example of that is I had this couple that would track their steps. They were like in their 80s, and you know, the one client, she would go for a walk like every day, and the husband would get his butt kicked every single day on the steps. But one day he just like massively dominated her, and it was so fun. I mean, he just blew her out of the water with his number of steps. And I show up to like train both of them. And he's like, "Did she tell you what happened?" And she was like, "Oh my God." And she like ran off. And he was like, "I destroyed her. I got so many more steps." And she's like, "I beat him every day. And this one time," and like, well, and then like she walks away. And as soon as she's out of earshot, he's like, "I clipped it around the dog's collar." This dog's like running around the yard, getting all these extra steps. And I thought that was so hilarious. But like those challenges kind of keep you in the action stage. You know, it's like, hey, for the next 30 days, we're going to see who can get the most steps every day. You know, it's a fun challenge, right? I used to also do check-ins. I would see like which client would get the most check-ins and offer, you know, like a free session or something like that. And then like if your client's in the maintenance stage now, we're just trying to keep them, you know, engaging in this regular lifestyle and not falling back into old habits. At this point, they're an expert in some ways. So encourage them to become the expert. They're not experiencing peer pressure anymore. They're the ones applying it, right? And that keeps them, like, get them to start their own, like, let's have them design a workout for a little while. I've done that with my clients at SoFi. I brought in my NASM textbook and I'm like, let's flip through, you pick, like, let's build this together. That's always kind of a fun one. Or we have them like lead in a group exercise class, right? When they become like a leader, they don't have time to fall back into old habits because now people are relying on them. So, kind of a fun one. I love the social cognitive theory stuff. I think it is a super fascinating approach to things, especially when we, I think that the more we understand that, the more sometimes we can look at other aspects of things and kind of understand them better. But checking in with you guys. Speaking of being social, questions, comments, or concerns? How y'all feeling?
Feeling good.
All righty. Well, let's go ahead and kill this. So we are meeting tomorrow.